Hey y'all, it's me. Um, right now, I am chilling. I did a little live performance earlier today, but that's not what this live stream is about. I'll get into that another time. And I'm like charging my phone and dealing with car things. But I did want to talk about this though. So as you can see from the title, there's a particular topic that I wanted to talk about. And the thing is, I've been wanting to make this video for a while. Well, this probably isn't going to be like the official video, but I'm just going to like briefly like make points. Um but I have been wanting to do a video on this topic for a while, and I held off on it because I wanted it to be like a um House of Divinity styled video. For anybody who knows, I had a YouTube channel called House of Divinity where I would do like breakdowns and reviews on albums and like performances and stuff like that. And I would do the whole thing. Like I would film it, do the research, edit it, get all the like additional clips and stuff in there. And I do have some like um ideas and breakdowns that I've been wanting to do, but I have intentionally held off on it just because like life has been happening, and in life happening, it's kind of shaped more perspective and opinions about how I would do those videos. So I'll eventually get to those projects in at the right time. Um and there's like a movie review, and it's interesting because it's like playing out in my life right now, kind of awkward moment when but yeah, but the video that I do want to talk about is Michael Jackson versus Prince, but not in the way that you would probably think. Most people would talk about this in the means of music, or like status and like who was more popular and whatnot. But I haven't really seen anybody talk about this in the space of business. And and I really wanted to like, and I'll probably still do it. I'll probably still do like a thorough researched dissertation style video about it. But and even more so now, this happens to be one of those videos where like as life has progressed, it's kind of added to my opinion, which already it added more to an opinion that I already had. So Michael versus Prince. Usually I would say in terms of music, I listen to more of Michael's music than I do Prince's music, but I love Prince more as a musician. And I know Michael is the more popular artist, but they're both legends in their own right. Rest in peace to both of them. Um, and you know, if you want to talk about discography, that's debatable. If you want to talk about like performance style, like I mean, obviously, like Prince can dance too, but Michael was like his main thing was like choreography and dance and performance. And with Prince, like he played instruments, but Michael was also a songwriter, So musically, we know these guys are elites. They're the best of the best at what they do. However, not enough people talk about like the business side of it. We've been talking about it more now these days because, especially as it pertains to being an independent artist and owning your masters and owning your music, which is something that Prince was one of the first people to talk about. Not like the first, I would say really the OG on that would be Sam Cooke. That's a whole nother video for another time. But he was really a pioneer in terms of like Black ownership in the music industry before it was even heard of or a thing. And I think he owned his own radio station and all those things. But with Prince, after dealing with Warner Brothers, that put him on a mission of really advocating for owning your masters, owning your rights, to a point where he would only collaborate with people if they owned their own masters. And I remember hearing Nas talk about an experience where Prince wanted to work with him, or he wanted to work with Prince or something like that. And Prince was like, "Do you own your masters?" And at the time he didn't. And then he was like, "Well, when you do, then talk to me." But they didn't get a chance to collaborate. But that's what sparked the flame with Nas to be about ownership in that way as well. Now, and like I said, you know, in this day and age, we see more people being independent artists. I'm an independent artist myself. You see more independent artists these days, and people really advocating for their own music and being their own bosses and owning their rights to their music. Now, something that we often, like, some people really talk about with Michael, there's a lot of like conspiracy around it, but a big move that Michael made at one point was you know, owning the Beatles catalog, right? That's something that people talked about a lot. Because Paul McCartney mentioned it to him when they were collaborating on Thriller, and then Michael was like, "Oh, okay." You know, purchasing like uh publishing and stuff like that. And so, you know, most people, when it comes to like the conversation around Michael owning publishing, people mostly talk about that moment where he um, owned the Beatles catalog. However, it wasn't just the Beatles catalog. He was going around collecting catalogs. Like, you know, he would meet with artists and ask them or get a rate for their publishing. And essentially what he was doing was playing the same game as the labels. And you know, that's what got him in the whole beef with Sony Records, because at one point he owned about 50% of Sony's publishing, him alone. And you know, owning other artists publishing. And you know, and then there's conspiracy of if that's the reason he was unalived. That's a whole nother conversation. Um, you know, but I won't get too much into that. But what I do want to say is, when it comes to the business side, and I might have briefly mentioned this in other videos too, but I'll really get into it here. For me personally, my personal opinion when it comes to Michael versus Prince, I would say that I'd have to stand with Prince, mainly because of what he stood for with business. Now, I know a lot of people talk about Michael owning publishing and stuff like that, and him like challenging the labels, but I don't really see many people critiquing him for it. And it's something that's always kind of like rubbed me the wrong way. You know, and I get it, like he was, you know, just as much as he celebrated and revered as an artist, he was making moves to establish himself as a businessman in the music industry. And essentially, he was doing the same thing the labels were doing, you know, basically owning other artists' rights in their catalogs. And personally, as an independent artist, I don't like that move. Um, you know, I mean, some people have done that deal with him and, you know, and he owned their catalog and maybe got paid for it, and that's cool. And if that's a decision that they wanted to make, that's cool. Cause some people will intentionally sell their catalog. Why? I don't know. But I've seen people do that. I mean, there was a deal maybe a few years ago that Justin Bieber did, I think like over 100 million, something like that. I'm not exactly 100% certain on the numbers, but he sold his catalog as well. And I think maybe Justin Timberlake might have. I think The Dream was considering it if he didn't already do it. Like there are artists who will like sell their catalogs. So there, I mean, you know, not everybody is all about the whole like ownership thing. I think it's important to me just because of the stories that we've heard about artists through the years as it pertains to owning your masters, owning the rights to your music, being able to make decisions about how your music is used if you do like a licensing deal and it being used in like a movie or a video game or whatever the case may be, and like being the one to make those decisions, and because you own it and it belongs to you. And, you know, something that Prince really advocated for was for artists owning their own music, because he's like, I produced these records, I play all the instruments, I wrote all these songs, I'm performing the song, you know. And the thing is, he doesn't even go to like, you know, he didn't even need the labels to like book him studio time or whatever the case may be, because he had his own studio. He's like, I did all the work to make this music. And basically, like, you know, it's not that he didn't want the labels to get paid, especially if they're doing the work of promoting the record. However, he's the one who made it, so he should be the one who owns it. So, you know, for me, I think I think that's fair. As it pertains to music. Um, However, when you think about how Michael, if you compare the two, when it comes to after they've already established themselves as artists, after they've already made their classic records and, the Thrillers versus the Purple Rains, and if you want to compare album to album or performance to performance, but if you think about how they approached the music business after already being through in the game, and having their own experiences, I personally, um, it's funny. There's a car that just drove by me, and the license plate is like he, like he. I guess I don't know how intentional that is or spiritual. Hey, Michael. Um. Anyway, um, respectfully. Um. But I would say I have to stand with Prince because the difference between the two ultimately is that Prince was about artists owning their own art, and Michael was about building his business, purchasing people's rights in publishing and owning other people's art, um, which is pretty much what the labels were doing, but he was just moving like the labels. And I mean, if there's people who like brokered those deals and intentionally worked with him and wanted to do that, that's cool, you know. However, I think we're in a day and age where being an independent artist, or even if you're not independent, but advocating for owning your masters and owning the rights to your music and your intellectual property is more intentional and spoken about and elevated in this day and age, and the conversations that you hear around being an artist. And with that said, um, I think that Prince was ahead of his time, and his fight was it wasn't like it was for anything. Usually any advocacy is usually for like just basic human rights, right? As it pertains to just like any industry or facet of life, right? Usually people who are like protesting with justification are protesting just for like, like women's rights for our bodies, right? Like that shouldn't have to be a conversation, but because the way the systems are set up, they are set up with the intention that the consumer doesn't have knowledge that they should have rights over their own body, over their own mind, over their own art and creativity. Until you wake up to the system that's happening around you, then it's like, wait, hold on. The fuck is y'all doing? Like, I have to advocate for myself, because a lot of times you're in situations where you don't know that you should advocate for yourself, because that's just how things are. And it's like, that's just how, oh, this is how they've been doing it for years, until somebody wakes up and it's like, wait, hold on. We should be able to own our rights. We should have the rights to our body. We should have the rights to our intellectual property. And then when you speak up about it and challenge the system, and especially if you're the one person to do it before it becomes a movement, they're usually the one that gets the brunt of the attack. Now, now we're in a day and age where more people are advocating for independence and owning their rights. And I think that if Michael were still out here trying to buy people's catalogs, I don't know how popular that would be. I mean, I'm sure people like still love and revere him as an artist and a creative, but just the whole notion of purchasing people's rights and purchasing people's publishing, um and doing so in a way to like build up his own empire, um like it's him, his way of playing the game. But I just have a lot more respect for Prince's stance in terms of not only liberating himself and owning his own music, but liberating other artists as well. And especially like there's several speeches of him from like the 90s and on, where he'll accept an award or he's presenting an award and he's waking people up to what's actually going on in the industry. And he doesn't have to do that. He could have just been like, oh, well, I'm just going to own my own music and do this over here. But no, he used his voice to advocate and wake up and empower and educate other people in the industry, other artists, specifically Black artists, to know their power and know their rights and what they deserve, and to not be graped in this industry, and to not be effed over by this industry, but putting people in a position of power over their own creativity and having autonomy over their soul, because that's really what it's about. And for that, you know, I'll always have love and respect for Prince, aside from Prince just being the genius and the musical prodigy that he is, but just what he stood for as it pertains to the business and music and advocating for artists to be their own owners of their own work. Okay. Can we like not too much on my part? And see, you see the shenanigans that I deal with? This is a live stream about music. I can get into a live stream about engineering, not music, devices. But that's not what this is about, as I'm dealing with my car right now. But with that said, much love to Prince. And I mean Michael too, because he is a legend, and I've grown up listening and loving his music, as well as, you know, his other family members. Um, but now that I'm older, now that I have my own experience in art and music, and dealing with the fight to protect and own your own intellectual property, and you know just that whole experience, and is just really trying to advocate for yourself as an artist, I yeah, I stand with that. Yeah, I know this might seem like a random topic, but it's it's a video I've been wanting to make for a while. um and in recent events in my life, like a few months ago or so, like around March, um there was just like a resurgence of me appreciating Prince's music. And I was really like in like a Purple Rain bag. And speaking of Purple Rain, um it reminds me of this Vlad interview that he did with Apollonia, who's in the Purple Rain movie and also in Vanity Six, I believe. And yeah. I mean, okay, I'm just gonna just say this briefly, because I don't need to advocate for nobody, and I don't. I advocate for me, but I will say this. I know a lot of people be chewing up Vlad, but I'm not gonna act like Vlad don't have some good interviews, and some interviews that really stood out to me that were pretty pivotal. In just my own interpretation of what goes on in the industry, the Apollonia one, and where he interviews her, as well as Angie Stone's interview. I don't think he's the one interviewing her, but it is on his platform. And I suggest everyone go watch that video. Rest in peace, Angie Stone. There is, even the stuff that we discovered about like her going back and forth with the label recently, there's stuff that she touches on then, because I think that interview came out like 2 years ago. If you have not watched that interview, watch that interview start to finish and pay attention to it too. Like, don't be watching it and like doing other things like I have several times. And there's a few times where I started watching it and falling asleep or whatever. Like, watch it start to finish and really like peep what she's saying in that interview, because there's a lot that she details about the industry. And even like, you know, some people that like, you know, talk about her relationship with D'Angelo, she really breaks it down and was like, look, you know, in the beginning, he was pursuing her. And, you know, and although people see him as like the sex symbol, he wasn't that when they first started talking. Like, he was a little bit chubbier or whatever. And it eventually, like, he morphed into that. But they really like connected from like music and just like personality and stuff like that. And then just, and, you know, and she talks about the industry and how she came up, how she was in a rap group at one point, which I never knew. I was like, Angie Stone being like a pioneer of like female hip hop, why is she not featured in, you know, the female hip hop documentaries? Because any hip hop documentary there is, I've seen it, you know. And I never knew that she was in a hip hop group. I never knew she rapped. And, you know, I got to do my homework and listen to the music and everything. But that's stories that we haven't seen told. And, you know, and she really gets into it, and just like a lot of the stuff about the industry and just certain things that have been revealed this year that was kind of going on or already like known or expected then. So yeah, I check that out. And I think there's another Vlad interview that um stood out to me. I think as of now those were like the two. Um yeah, but I know everybody be like chewing them up a little bit, and you know, and they might have valid reason to do so. But you know, he definitely, I think it might be like three interviews that I watched in the last few months where I was just like, yo, this is like gold, you know. Just like archived interviews that, you know, really explain a lot of what goes on in this industry, and you know how things be like set up and predicted to happen before they be happening, and you know, and just like people's experiences and all these things, like it's crazy. um but yeah, anyway, that's a side note, but I transitioned to that part of the conversation because the Apollonia interview. Yeah, but anyway, you know, this was about Michael and Prince. um and yeah, I don't know. I have more of appreciation for Purple Rain at this point in my life, versus when I first heard about it, and when I first heard the music and seen the movie. You know, it's one of those things where it kind of like gets better with time. I feel, for me, at least. And yeah, I don't know. Life is interesting. Yeah, and music is beautiful. You know, I got my computer blue on. Anyway, all right, that's all I'm gonna like speak about here. Like I said, at some point when I get in a more like settled situation and I could really like get into my like video editing bag, then I'll do a more in-depth breakdown of the Michael versus Prince talking music business, not just music. And I'll really break down like specific situations and scenarios, and like, you know, like the deals that Michael was doing throughout the years, and just like when that whole like Sony battle started versus like Prince, and what led up to him really getting into that space of um you know, why independence is important. And I mean, and there's other videos out there about it, you know, and people talk about it, and there's, you know, really in-depth uh videos, but I always really wanted to break it down just because I hadn't seen nobody talk about it. Um, and then, also again, as life has progressed and I've really like come to appreciate Purple Rain more, that kind of gave me more perspective to like, which I already stood on the fact that I appreciate how Prince conducted business versus Michael. Like I respect Michael's, approach to how he played the game, but I respect Prince's the game that Prince was playing better. So yeah, anyway. All right, that's it. That's the conversation. That's the live stream. I hope you enjoyed this. And eventually I'll be back to discuss more things. And yeah, just share my perspectives. Much love.